Hello everyone, welcome to COVID Safe Production Practice. I'd like to start this evening's presentation or this evening's webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including those joining us for our webinar here today. I would like to pay respect to their elders past and present and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. In particular, I would like to honour and pay respect to the local Arakwal people in the Bundjalung Nation, where I am currently located, and honour local custodians and elders as they continue with the stewardship and cultural maintenance of the country where I live and work. So wonderful to see so many people here this evening at SCREENWORKS COVID Safe Production in Practice. And we are delighted to have Kinnane and Brett Popplewell as our guest speakers here today. And they're going to be interviewed by Northern Rivers producer Lois Randall. Both Annie and Brett were at the coalface of working with COVID safe protocols. Annie was on the only production to continue when lockdown was announced, and Brett was on the first productions to get back up. So they'll be talking with Lois about their experiences of working using COVID safe protocols. And this is very much an experiential rather than specific guidelines, which will be referred to during the talk. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa O'Mara and I'm the Programs and Operations Manager at SCREENWORKS. And behind the scenes, we have a big support team from SCREENWORKS who will be working on the technical side of things, including our CEO and fearless leader, Ken Crouch, our events coordinator and tech extraordinaire, Amy Shaw, and our Can Do Anything projects coordinator, Louise Hodgson, and our Brilliance Comms coordinator, Helen Nash. So thank you to Team SCREENWORKS for helping this run smoothly tonight. Now, I expect all of you here this evening are getting very familiar with Zoom webinars, which is a platform that we're bringing this to you on today. And a reminder that you can see and hear the guest speakers, but they cannot see or hear you. So if you want to interact with us, you can do so via the chat window, and the icon is on the bottom of the screen. So I recommend that you have that open at all times, because as we make reference to various sites through the conversation, we'll be putting the links up in the chat box. So if you just click on the chat icon along the bottom, and the chat box should come up on the right hand side of your screen. Now, there will be an opportunity for you to ask our guest speaker questions, and for this we recommend that you open the Q&A box when it comes to question time. Now, this is also an icon on the bottom of your screen, and it is a pop-up. And when we go to questions, if you put your question in the Q&A box, it means that you can vote for whichever question is most relevant to what you want to ask. It orders the questions in terms of when they came in and in terms of the most popular, and it means you can comment on questions. So that's a really good way for us to manage the questions. And there's potentially around 90 people here this afternoon, so we want to keep the questioning as smooth as possible. For anyone here this afternoon who's not familiar with SCREENWORKS, we're a not-for-profit charity and we're based in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. We provide screen-related development and networking opportunities, programs and initiatives specifically designed to support people who are living in regional, rural, remote Australia. Now, today's webinar will run till 6:30, and I would like to hand you over to Lois Randall. Lois is an intrinsic and exemplary part of the fabric of the screen industry here in the Northern Rivers, and we're delighted that she's able to facilitate this session. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to this conversation, which will make it all the more interesting and informative for all of us. Lois is an award-winning screen producer with a passion for distinctive narrative drama. Her credits include the 8-episode series of Sea Change, which screened on Network 9 and was produced here in the Northern Rivers. The live-action children's series, Grace Beside Me, that screened on NITV, ABC and the Disney Channel. The Gods of Wheat Street, that screened on ABC, and she was development producer on the award-winning web series Deadlock, just to name a few of the things that she's done. Lois's professional experience includes an executive director at the Australian Screen Directors, which is now ADG, and she was manager of Metro Screen. So Lois, thank you. It's wonderful to have you here, and I'll hand over to you to take it from here. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm very happy to be here, and it's an important and very practical session that we have today about working in this strange new era of COVID. We're very lucky to have such wonderful guests with us today, and I'm very grateful to them because I know they're very busy people and they're here to share their practical experience of working in production in the era of COVID. Annie Kinnane is, we'll talk to first. Annie is an experienced producer and production manager who has produced a series of acclaimed short films, including the award-winning Flat Daddy and more recently the feature film Pimped, starring Ella Scott Lynch, which premiered at Fright Fest in London in 2018. After we talk to Annie, then we'll talk to Brett Popplewell. And Brett has worked in the Australian and international film and television industry for over 30 years as a producer, line producer and assistant director on an impressive 200 plus hours of award-winning film and television drama. His credits include Salem's Lot, The Starter's Wife, Bastard Boys, Water Rats, The Alice, Crusoe, James Cameron's 3D feature Sanctum, Banished, Hogs, and the miniseries Picnic at Hanging Rock. So we'll speak to, I'll manage a Q&A with each of our guests, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions from the participants as well. So first up, we'll go to Annie. Now, Annie is going to hopefully join me in a second here. And there she is. Hi, Annie. Welcome. So Annie, you were the production manager of Children of the Corn, and that must have just been an extraordinary experience for you to be going into production on a project of that scale right when COVID was hitting us. And that realization must have been dawning on you of what that actually meant. So Children of the Corn, as Lisa said, was one of the only films in the nation and possibly one of the only ones in the world to keep shooting during the lockdown after the pandemic was declared. Can you tell us a bit about that production and what were the unique factors that actually made it possible for you to keep filming when so many other projects had to shut down?
Yeah, so Lois, I guess up front I'd like to make the disclaimer that today, I am talking about my personal experience on the production of Children of the Corn and not as the safety expert or the person who designed any of the protocols. But from my personal perspective, there are a number of critical elements that allowed me to decide professionally to be involved with the production, which was going to shoot during COVID. To put it into context, New South Wales, well, Australia was in the first wave of COVID, and I was living in temporarily in accommodation in Bondi. And because of the Bondi backpacker beach crowding incident, where all the beaches were shut down, but the backpackers were, like wall to wall on the beach, I was like many other people was concerned about, catching COVID or being around people with COVID. And this was a Monday night, the 16th of March, and I was actually talking to my little brother on the phone, and he's a radiographer in Brisbane, about the pandemic and about being exposed to COVID. And to my surprise, he was really confused as to why I was so paranoid and why the country was closing down and actually carrying on so much about staying home and total isolation being touted as the best option. Because what he was saying to us was that as medical workers working in hospitals, they dealt with germs and infections every day. In his view, we should have been learning very quickly to deal with COVID and how to, as they do, every day going into the hospital. So, obviously in hospitals, they have procedures in place. Anyone who's, been in a hospital would be aware of sterilized equipment, wearing masks, washing hands before and after touching anything, social distancing, minimizing cross-contamination, minimizing physical contact. So I had that conversation with my little brother on the Monday. Then Tuesday, Pam Collis, who's a line producer I know, called me to say that there was a Hollywood producer who'd be calling me to ask if I'd be a line producer, the production manager on Children of the Corn. Now, Pam, ironically, had a background in medical research, and she, for about 10 years, had worked in a lab. And what she said to me was that she was going to apply the same types of protocols to running the production as she did in a medical research lab. So, you know, I knew Pam. Pam's a very definite woman. So if she said that's how she was going to approach it, I knew that that's what she was going to do. The next day is Wednesday, and that Hollywood producer did ring me, and he told me of his plan to create a safe bubble out at Richmond, which was an hour north of Sydney, where they had grown a corn of field ready for the filming of Children of the Corn. His plan was to bring the cast and crew who could assure us that they'd been practicing self-isolation into this bubble, and that everyone would stay there in the bubble for as long as we could and continue to film. So the initial plan really was just to shoot out the cornfield, which was about 12 days, but none of us really knew whether we'd get to shoot one day, let alone 12 days. So on the Thursday, 19th of March, Pam and I met with Lucas and the other producers of Children of the Corn in Balmain. Now, Lucas Foster, he is a heavy hitter from Hollywood. He was one of the producers on Ferrari versus Ford and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And that day, we talked through all of the policies and procedures that he'd come up with to ensure the safety of the cast and crew. So, convinced with what he had told me that day, Thursday night, I went back to Bondi, packed up everything, and on Friday, I drove to the Crown Plaza in Richmond. So with the production office set up in the function room at the Crown Plaza, about 50 metres away from my room, for pretty much 1 month, I only saw 4 other crew in the production office and about 3 staff from the hotel. The Crown Plaza was exclusively ours. It was shut to the public, and Pam instructed them using her old medical lab procedures on to the hotel as to how to keep us safe. So the cleaners were instructed not to touch any of our personal items. They would only come to our rooms as requested. There was hand sanitizer placed at the entrances to all the doors of the hotels. And, you know, no one was able to come in and out of the production office. And I didn't go out of the hotel grounds for about a month. And we started to pull together a shoot with the mindset of being in a bubble within a bubble. We had 2 weeks of pre, which is pretty much unheard of with you know, the size of the shoot that we were embarking upon. And principal photography started 2 weeks later on Friday, the 3rd of April. So I suppose the safety of the cast and the crew was the ultimate commitment, and that came from the very top down. That came from Lucas Foster, and combined with Pam and her medical research background, and the conversation I'd had with my brother, it pretty much all of those things dovetailed together to give me the confidence that we were going to be able to facilitate a safe production. Pretty much no one was working in Australia by this time, and Children of the Corn was the last film crew standing. Most everybody in the country had been self-isolated for a couple of weeks by then, and any crew that I spoke to were, like me, keen to get out of Sydney and come and work in our bubble.
So who were you answerable to in making that decision, and were you under pressure from anybody to shut down the production, to suspend?
No, we weren't. Lucas Foster, our producer, he took full responsibility for the production. He personally rang each of the lead cast members to give his assurance of the plans. Some of the advantages, I suppose, were that most of our actors were children who at that time were believed to be less susceptible to the virus. And much of the movie was going to be shot in cornfields and other kind of vast outdoor spaces. And, you know, I think a lot of other productions had elected to shut down because they felt that was a duty of care, but there were no real industry protocols in place at this time. But the construction industry had continued to work. So our line producer, Pam, she based all of the negotiations that she had with the powers to be, like WorkSafe Australia or Screen New South Wales or MIA. You know, her approach pretty much, well, if the construction industry was allowed to continue work, then what was stopping us? And, you know, nobody really said to stop, so we just kept going. I think there were, you know, some misinformed people who were critical of us working, but I can tell you what, I felt 100% more safe being in the environment that we'd created in Richmond than I would have been living back in Bondi.
So obviously you had some unique advantages, which were that you already had your insurance in place, I presume. Is that the case? And that there wasn't a completion guarantor? But is it the case that there was only one main location, or were the locations very contained, and what did it sort of mean for the cast and the crew on set?
Yeah, with the intention that we were only going to shoot out the cornfields in the first 12 days, that was really all that we had planned to do. So very contained. So the cast and crew were all staying at the Crown Plaza or a number of other accommodations around Richmond. And, you know, because they were all close to the public, so the accommodations were all safe. There was rewrites of the script happening every day, sometimes script changes would come through late at night. But it was the commitment really from Lucas and his ability to draw in more finance for us to be able to put additional crew on, to put protocols into place that really were designed to keep the cast and the crew very safe. And, you know, like Lucas had made personal commitments to the cast, some had travelled from interstate, but we had 2 casts that had travelled from overseas. And so he had to live up to that commitment. And based on his reputation, we were all confident that he was going to.
Thank you, Annie. And what about on set for the cast and crew? What were the processes that they had to sort of adhere to? And who sort of monitored that? I've heard of some productions that they have security guards on set to, you know, ensure compliance and that sort of thing. What did it mean for your cast and crew?
Well, we had a safety consultant who was already attached to the production and was doing, you know, the normal kind of safety reports that would be done in pre-production. And he went and did a certificate in infection control training, COVID-19 practices. And he introduced those safety elements into the production as he would for any other, you know, occupational health and safety issue. Lucas Foster had the foresight to engage a concierge doctor on set to be with us every day while we were in production. And with the concierge doctor service, they'd created a protocol that if any cast or crew showed any sign of COVID symptoms, they would be immediately isolated in a hotel room. The doctor would administer the COVID test in the full hazmat suit, and that person would stay isolated in the hotel room until the test came back negative, which, you know, fortunately it did every time. And at the time, that $3,000 a day doctor, you know, it mightn't have seemed like it was going to be very much of an expense if we're going to shoot for 12 days, but we ended up shooting for 9 weeks. And that doctor stayed, you know, well, we had different doctors, but it was the concierge service. And we had one of those doctors with us every single day of shooting. WorkSafe, you know, they had a lot of posters and a lot of information that they were distributing at the time. And so we would include that in the crew pack that went to any of the new crew that were coming on board with us. We had big posters that were blown up and put up around the set. Every head of department had to provide their departmental policies to reduce risk. And, you know, fortunately, because of Lucas's commitment and his standing in the film community, you know, he was able to bring in additional finance to cover additional crew. Like we had Clean Dean. Clean Dean, his only job was to wipe down all the unit areas and equipment. We put on a COVID production assistant specifically to administer the daily survey, which went out to all crew before crew call. They had to, you know, go through and answer whether they had any of the symptoms and basically do a declaration to say that they were symptom free. And if not, if they ticked yes to having any of those symptoms, our COVID PA would then advise the nurse and the paramedic and the concierge doctor via WhatsApp, and then they would be immediately followed up. The symptoms would be diagnosed, and if they were the COVID symptoms, they would go through that protocol of being isolated and tested and stay isolated until the test results came back. And there was also an additional safety person as well, whose sole job was to walk around set and remind people to socially distance, because, you know, film crew are very community team minded, and so their job was to say, you know, stand back, please, keep your distance.
And how did it affect everybody's morale, this sort of the way that you had to work, and what were the biggest challenges of getting everybody to continue to comply to the protocols over that longer period?
Well, I think, you know, pretty much everyone that I contacted was just happy with the idea of coming to work, because, you know, the rest of the country had shut down. But, you know, everybody had to sign a COVID safe code of conduct before coming on board with this. You know, we'd created a bubble. There was no public involved. At one stage, the hotel was catering for all of the meals outside what was being catered on set. So people had made a personal decision whether they felt they were going to be able to come and work with us. And I think we lost maybe one or two people out of makeup and costume who just, for their personal reasons, they had family at home or they had sick parents or something, and they decided to leave the production. But other than that, we went from initially a fairly small crew that doubled in size as the protocols became better, as we you know, were convinced that we were shooting safely, and we were able to put on a splinter crew and kind of double what we were doing in the hope that we were going to get as much as we could in the can before, you know, maybe the inevitable happened.
And so obviously there was the impact on the schedule and the budget were really significant. Do you have any idea what that was as a sort of a percentage, or I'm sure you can't disclose actual figures?
No, I can't, but I would, you know, I would say, we could safely say it would be a quarter to a third increase on the budget. And that's, you know, just on the production costs. That's not taking into account the effect it's had on post-production or distribution. So,
and how long did you have to extend the shoot for due to the COVID protocols and the impact on filming?
Originally, it was supposed to be a 5-week shoot, and we did end up shooting for 9 weeks. And that was because there was a lot of rewriting as we went along. You know, there were instances too where probably in the beginning, because we were just going to shoot 12 days in the cornfield, and then when we were able to still keep filming because we were safe, we had the support of all of the screen agencies, we had the support of the government, you know, the police, the local police were in support of us, like the community was in support of us. So the longer we kept going, the more we kept going. You know what I mean? So what initially was, okay, let's just get this bit done. Then as our success built, then the aim was to try and shoot the whole movie, which eventually we did.
Amazing. So the hugest congratulations to you. And also for your resilience and endurance by the sounds of things. Now, Annie, just I'm going to ask you if there are any positive things that you've learned from this experience that you'll take on to your future projects. But while we're doing that, Lisa's got a couple of images that she wants to share. So Lisa, we'll just share those images and quickly, we've also just had a question come in about, was everyone wearing masks and gloves on set? And you'll see from the photos that Lisa's sharing that initially there's one of Annie not wearing a mask, and then there's another one, you'll see the crew where they are wearing masks. But it was actually before masks became a thing, wasn't it, Annie?
It was, and also that's inside the production office, that shot that you see last film crew standing. So that's my assistant production coordinator, and he was one of, there are only, you know, 5 of us that pretty much were in that large room for most of the time. And when we got deliveries from the Sydney office or from anywhere else, nobody was allowed into the production office. They had to drop the deliveries outside, and then someone from the production office would go out. sanitize whatever it was, and then bring it into the production office. So we had created our little bubble within the bubble there in the production office. And as I say, nobody from the hotel or you know, no cast or any of the other crew were able to come into there unless they'd sanitized. We had a maximum of 10 people because of the size of the room in there. So when we were inside the production office working like that, we didn't wear the masks. And at that time, you know, you're right, Lois.
Can we see the other photo, Lisa? Please.
Yeah, generally it was regarded at that time that you know, wearing masks was not as effective because people, if they weren't wearing them properly, would be touching their face or their eyes or whatever else. So this is our crew photo, and as you can see, everybody is wearing their masks, and we are all socially distanced.
But while you were shooting, that wasn't generally done because that was in the early days of the shutdown. That where we were still being advised that that wasn't necessary.
So wherever like makeup or costume were close to the actors, they all wore masks and they all sanitized consistently. The only times where, like, so eventually after shooting out the cornfields, we did do one location move, and the location was a barn. So they did do social distancing in that barn, but they also wore masks. So all of the art department wore masks when they were working in there. So it was very dependent on what cluster we were talking about. So if there were clusters that were working closely together, then yes, they were all wearing masks. But for where we'd created a bubble, we, you know, like we chose not to wear a mask because we felt we were safe and had the right protocols in place.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Annie. We're going to go to Brett now, but then we'll come back and there'll be plenty of time for questions to both Annie and Brett. So I've just noticed a couple of questions we didn't get to then. Brett was head of production at Fremantle and led both Neighbours and Wentworth back into production post the lockdown. It's really significant that more than 100 productions were cancelled in Australia due to the lockdown. And Neighbours is believed to have been the first suspended TV drama to resume production, closely followed by Wentworth. And when Fremantle brought those two shows back into production, they became examples and beacons of hope to producers all over the world. So congratulations, Brett, and thank you. So firstly, who made that bold decision to start those productions up again, and what risk management assessments did you have to undertake to inform that decision?
Oh, look, you know, fortunately, I work for Fremantle, and I have a lot of support behind me. So it was a decision made by many people within the company. You know, after long discussions, Neighbours was the first one to start up, and as you said, it was the first one to start up in Australia. So we really didn't know where to start, and clearly we knew we had to make a risk assessment to work out whether this was possible or not. So we put the production on a hiatus for 4 weeks whilst putting together a plan of attack. And once we put the plan of attack together, we then discussed it with main cast and crew and see how they felt about coming back. And they were pretty happy about coming back. And you know, clearly during that period, we were all involved. All my colleagues at Wentworth were involved, and at Fremantle were involved in the decision-making process. Neighbours was an easier one to get up because of the facility, because of the site that they shoot in. It was very controlled. It's as a lot of people know, but maybe not everyone knows, that Neighbours is made out of the old Channel 10 studios here in Melbourne, the old original building. So it's a purpose-built site. So it made it incredibly easier for us to actually start up because of this. So again, what Annie was saying, we went through a process of, first of all, sitting down, trying to decide how the hell we get this goddamn thing started again. Where do we start? We started getting advice from people outside the industry because no one in the industry really knew what to do. So We gathered information, and then we clearly worked out a plan of attack. And the main plan of attack was to, as again Annie said, we broke the site down into sections, and people couldn't cross those sections. And the idea was to lower the footprint, to lower the cross connection with people, so cast and crew. So if we did have an outbreak or a sickness or someone, which has happened a few times, people have got sick during the day, we know that we can trace where they've been, and we don't have to close down every department. With Wentworth, it was similar, although a longer process. Neighbours only had 4 weeks break. Wentworth had almost 3 months. Wentworth, of course, is a slightly different show, and the process was longer. We involved all the cast and all the crew, but mainly the cast to start with. We put together a 35-page document, again, a risk assessment document based on the site, based on scripts that we had left. We had 10 episodes or 9 episodes to shoot to finish the series. And we moved it on from there. And it was a long process of discussions and involvement with the cast and the crew until we got to the point where we felt as though that we were happy with the risk assessment, happy with our site, happy with the way we put together, and then we started up very slowly.
Okay, so that was the producers obviously working with safety advisors and consulting the cast and crew to develop those protocols.
Correct. And the cast and crew got quite involved in both sides. You know, they had some really great suggestions, and that was really, really good, really positive. We have to, one of the processes that I found is you know, clearly anxiety. And we need people to be able to walk into these sites and feel comfortable and safe. So that was a real hurdle.
Can you talk us through some of the protocols that you had to put in place and what that meant for people working on the production?
Yeah, look, I mean, first up, we did start with personal protection device. We had masks and shields. We had these type of shields, portable lightweight shields, and clearly just normal masks like this. Every crew member, anyone that walked on site, had before they walked into the building had to wear these devices. Clearly, the first process was if you were sick, you don't come to work. Any symptoms whatsoever, you just don't come to work. But when we came into work, as you came into work every morning, every person that came on site had the temperature checked and a questionnaire from the nurse. How are you feeling? Have you got any problems? Have you got a sore throat? Blah, blah, blah. We also had all our main cast tested and crew that we knew that would interact with cast tested prior to us starting. And we had them tested weekly through the whole shoot. We had to set up the site, as I said, to make it safe, make sure that just logistics of the site would work. Again, also with Wentworth, we broke it down into areas, post-production, art department, production, and no one ever crossed over. And you know, just making sure that everyone was aware of the processes that we went through.
Who was sort of where was the greatest innovation required in terms of being COVID safe? I can imagine like the departments that have to have the most contact with the outside world would be particularly challenged, and also the departments where they're working in very close contact with for example, they're in the makeup bus with the actors. Yeah, where sort of were the most extreme measures required?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Makeup probably. Because of just exactly what they had to do with cast and crew, cast. Costume, they never interacted. All the cast on both Neighbours and Wentworth dressed themselves. The makeup, we had to make sure that the makeup rooms were ventilated. We extended the makeup room at Neighbours. Instead of just one big makeup room, we ended up having 2. At Wentworth, we had a very big makeup room set up anyway. Fortunately, we don't have to use buses with us. And that was ventilated much more. And of course, the personal protection for all the makeup people was clearly important.
Okay. We've got a question that's come in about for shoots that aren't in a sort of controlled environment. Do you have to involve the authorities, for example, notifying the police about gatherings and that's the numbers of people on set? What sort of external scrutiny is there?
Look, we're fortunate on both shows. We're on a closed environment set site. So no, we didn't have to advise anyone. We were within, you know, we had to get permission to continue on. We had to get permission from, not permission, but we had to get advice from Film Victoria about how we can continue on. And again, we were very lucky because both sites we had were very controlled. During the period of closure, I think we closed around, just looking at the dates, I think we closed on the 23rd of March or something like that. But I was actually producing another show, which was a 4-part miniseries down here. Sadly, that was a mainly location shoot. So on one day, on the 23rd of March, we closed down. We closed down Wentworth. We closed down the show that I was producing with Jen, and we closed down Neighbours the week later.
It must have been a horrible day in the office.
It was a tough day, but you know, I mean, I think the problem was then we didn't know. We didn't understand this virus. We didn't understand it. We didn't know where it was going. Starting back up was a lot easier, although it was a long process. It was a tough process. But the most difficult thing I found across the board was people, just getting them used to it, getting over their anxieties and their concerns. You know, I'm a true believer that you can teach an old dog new tricks, and we had to teach people new tricks. And it took a minute, particularly on set, because set's where it's all about. You know, as we know, we can control the environment outside the set, but on set it was new for all of us. And by the way, it was something that was always a question from everyone, and certainly a concern from me. Is this going to take longer? Is this going to be more difficult? We're also fortunate to have Neighbours first up, and so we learned from Neighbours how the process went and how the problems and the concerns we had. Then we started Wentworth, so we're pretty well prepared for it. But surprisingly to all of us, it actually went really smooth on set, really smooth. And if in a weird sort of way, the first week after shooting, you know, I sat down and spoke to one of the first, and I said, well, how is it going? And he said, actually, in some ways it's more organised because we can only have a certain amount of people on set. So instead of everyone having, I'm sure you're used to this, Lois, being on set, everyone wants to be on set at the same time and they all want to do a job. And sometimes it gets quite difficult. Where we knew that we could only have a certain amount of people on the set. So therefore you'd have the grips go in, you'd have the gaffers go in, and then you would have the art department, and then you'd have rehearsals, and it was really organised and regimented. And that's very rarely happens on a film set. Even though you try to make it happen, it's very difficult for it to happen.
Okay, so each department sets up one at a time.
Yeah.
Instead of everyone sort of together and trying to get out of each other's way.
Yeah. It was a positive on that. Now, I'm sure, as we all do, once we get over this terrible thing, I'm sure we'll slip back into our old ways. But it was really, really positive on set, a positive on-set experience for most of us.
No, that's really interesting. I'll come back to that when we've got Annie back as well. Yeah. What about, Annie mentioned having to rewrite. What did you have to do, make a lot of creative changes? And what about the intimacy? On
both shows,
they're intimate.
Yeah, I mean, on both shows we made changes. You know, and we had to, particularly at the very beginning when we didn't know how to control this and we didn't have as much advice as we should have, as we needed, because we didn't have anyone else to advise us. So we were making it up as it went along. So again, Neighbours was the first cab off the rank. We decided very much to stop any intimacy whatsoever. So there was a lot of rewrites there for a long time. Slowly, we've learned how to handle that a little bit better in the respect of COVID testing for the cast again on both productions. On Wentworth, we were a little bit luckier because we had all the scripts ready to go for the last 9 episodes. So we ended up breaking the scripts down. I don't know if people can see that, but that's a
Wow.
green, yellow, and red. So we had green COVID-9, which was we didn't feel as though there was any problems whatsoever. Yellow is well, listen, there's going to be some sort of contact, but I think that it's not so bad. And red clearly was contact, and contact was stunts as well as intimate scenes. And what we did on both productions, we rehearsed those red scenes to the nth degree.
Mm-hmm.
Rehearsed with our COVID manager, with our COVID safety officer, with our director, with our nurse, and with our cast, and we lock it off. We all sign off on the way that we put it together and the way the director wants it, and that we're all happy with that. And it cannot be changed. So once it gets on set, no one can get up there and say we're doing it a different way. It's got to stick to the same way.
Oh, that's interesting. And so, what about the budget and the schedule impacts of the protocols, and including sort of new positions that you had to create?
We had to the schedule impact. Apart from the show closing down. The show's closing down. I mean, on both productions, it hasn't affected the schedule too much. It's a little bit more difficult on Neighbours because of the amount of content, 6 episodes a week, the amount of actors. We have 2 kind of full-time crews going full-time. We tried to keep cast on one crew and the other, but that was difficult. They cross over from location to studio, I should say backlot studio. So that was more difficult, but on Wentworth it wasn't so bad. Everything was pretty smooth. So the schedule wasn't affected. The budget, look, it's difficult to say because I mean the impact, the actual cost of the COVID, I would think on both productions would have been about 1.5–2% of the budget, but the lockdown, the shutdown clearly was more on one than the other because we shut down longer. I'd say the shutdown on Wentworth cost us about 5% of the budget. The Neighbours was probably about 2%.
Okay, interesting. And I've just got a question that's come in. It's a practical question, and then we'll go to a Q&A and we'll invite Annie back to join us. So the question that's coming is just about COVID testing and how you found getting results in a timely manner and whether that was expensive and how that worked.
Yeah, they're not super cheap, particularly depending on how many you're doing a day. We decided to do tests on a Friday. We had a nurse come out with the COVID tests every Friday. We did it on site, clearly, because it was difficult to get cast clearly at off-site to get them done. We tested every Friday. We in most cases got the results back some days on a Saturday, but most cases by the Sunday, or certainly by the Sunday. And we did that because if we had problems, we had a weekend at least, or at least a day to decide on what we're going to do. The cost of the tests are around about $120 a test. So it's not cheap, particularly if we're doing 40 or 50 a week over that long period.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much, Brett, for that. We're going to keep asking questions, but I'd just like to invite Annie to join us again. And I just want to ask both of you. I've been talking to a few different line producers, and I've been surprised to hear them say, as you also just said, Brett, that there have been some positives and things that they might take forward. And those things have included forcing everyone to go paperless, and the continuous hours, sort of changing the way people work on set. What about for both of you? Have there been any kind of things that you think will change the way we'll work going forwards?
Well, I think the film industry is very OH&S and safety conscious because of the nature of the freelance nature of our industry. and as freelancers, we're all used to hitting the ground running. So we are able to introduce change very quickly. So look, you know, the paperless thing I think is great. People becoming more aware of being safe is great. I think what Brett was saying before though, there has been a lot of anxiety that's been created in our industry that in some way probably needs to be addressed. You know, with anxiety combined with long work hours and high levels of stress, it's probably something that down the track we will see some repercussions. So I think that's something that as an industry we do need to be aware of in the future. But sure, you know, there are some advantages that have come.
What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the paperless is really good. I think we've been trying to do that for a long time and we just haven't done it successfully.
So are your productions now all paperless?
As much as we can be, yeah. There's still some, and you can never get rid of all of it at this stage, but 90%, 95%, yes. The fact that people actually have to kind of be a bit more regimental, as I said, not only on set, but kind of offset. And weirdly, and this is purely speaking in a practical sense, and I don't, in some ways don't like this, but it did work well. Because we had different zones, people couldn't come into your zone. Therefore, I think we all became a bit more efficient because we didn't go and annoy people and in other areas, and people didn't come in and annoy us, and no one's better than walking around the office and annoying people than I am. So I think they were mainly pleased about me not being able to walk around.
Oh, that's interesting. I've heard another production where they've staggered lunch breaks, which means they've been able to kind of continue working through lunch and then wrap earlier and have shorter days. I've got a question that's come in about exactly that sort of question, what was the impact on the shooting day and also the amount of minutes that you're able to shoot each day? Did that change at all because of the
we didn't change. I mean, we eased into both Wentworth and Neighbours as we started off less minutes and less pages per day for the first week. And we planned that might happen for the first couple of weeks, but it didn't. So we picked up pretty quickly.
What about you, Annie?
I'm sorry, I was reading one of the questions that had come through. I wasn't listening.
That's all right. Well, it's just about whether there was any impact on the amount that you're able to shoot each day in terms of screen time.
Yeah, look, I think the script changes were probably the biggest thing that because our director was also the writer, he would be addressing that, you know, consistently. So he'd be filming during the day and writing during the night or on weekends. And, you know, fortunately, because it's Children of the Corn, we didn't have adults in intimate scenes or anything like that. So we, you know, we didn't have that to address. Yeah, that's.
Yeah. And there was a question earlier that I didn't get to with you, which was just about, you know, how much of the rewriting was going on was because of COVID and having to be COVID safe.
Yeah, a lot, because there was originally a scene where it was in a town hall and all the adults and all the children are gathered there, and it's a big protest, and it's the clash between the adults and the children, because the story is about the adults letting the kids down and the kids taking revenge. And so that was written as a really big scene. And so that had to be addressed as to how to get the same kind of impact out of the scene, but with a whole lot of less people. And, you know, there was some disappointment from actors who'd been cast and then weren't able to perform, but you know, it was all in the name of safety and looking after the health of everyone involved.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. There's a question that's come in from Michelle, which is about the restrictions. So there's a question, what are the restrictions on how many people you can have on set, including cast and crew? And I imagine the answer is horses for courses, that it depends on the risks involved in the exact scenario, and it's different. Brett, would you like to maybe talk about how that is determined?
It's the size of the room. So, you know, each set we measured and had a limit of how many people could be in that actual set or that part of that set each time. And it's basically as simple as that. You know, it's calculated. I haven't got the calculations in front of me, but it's calculated pretty simply. So, you know, and then you make the decision based on that.
So you were involved, I understand, in advising the Screen Producers Australia, or that the Screen Producers Australia has developed COVID-safe guidelines, which we'll share a link to that, that document. And it sort of steps through for each, the sort of considerations. So basically each production has to develop their own strategies and protocols and do their own risk assessment. So it sort of steps through, it's got, you know, checklists and points to consider for the entire production, and then department by department. How were you involved, or how did that, were those guidelines sort of informed by your experience?
I gave the guys a copy of, first of all, the Neighbours COVID plan that we had together. Then I gave them a copy of our risk assessment for Wentworth. And the document has got a lot of that in it because we'd already done the work, so that was fine. And then we had ongoing conversations. We went through the document. I had a look at the document. I made some notes. I made some suggestions. And then clearly they got advice from a whole lot of other people. We had a couple of Zoom calls with various people in the industry to discuss, and I had one-on-ones with them as well. You know, one of the things, as you kind of mentioned on this, one of the first things I said to them was that, you know, it's not a one-all document. This document is not based, you know, here it is, that's one-all, and it works on every production. Every production is different. And we all know that within the industry that every production is different because of the way it's written and why it's written and where it's written and where you shoot it and how you shoot it and all this. So you've got to build your own plan. Now that document is really good, and some of the international documents are really good to take out of that, but you've got to base your plan on your site, mainly your particular show, you know, the way, where you're going to shoot it, how you're going to shoot it, and all these things. And also you've got to put in the creative side as well. Is this going to be affected? Is it going to affect the creative side of the show? It's very important that people realise that you've got to spend the time and the effort and sadly the money on getting it right. Yeah.
Did you have insurance in place already for both Wentworth and Neighbours when you pre-COVID?
It didn't cover COVID.
It didn't. Okay.
As it became a pandemic, all bets are off, sadly. So, but we did absolutely have insurance in place, but it wouldn't cover it.
Okay. And so how did you kind of address that?
Well, again, fortunately, Fremantle is a company that could, you know, we did have the financial backing.
Oh, just frozen, I think. So I think Brett's frozen, so I'll just keep talking, but for people to be aware that Screen Australia has developed, oh, he's back.
No, back, sorry. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, so, you know, we're also getting, you know, we're in discussions with Screen Australia at the moment to help us as well, as most productions are. But sadly, it's a very expensive, particularly the shutdown is a very expensive thing to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you, you know, if you shut at a location, as you know, production down, it's a lot cheaper because you're not keeping those overheads. But these overheads in both sites that we have are very high.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So just to let people know that Screen Australia does now have a temporary interruption fund that people can have a look at on the Screen Australia website. Couple more questions. Is Neighbours still shooting, or does Fremantle still have anything shooting in Melbourne under the current more extreme shutdown?
Yes, we both, Wentworth and Neighbours, shot through the current restrictions. We wrapped Wentworth on last Friday, and Neighbours is still shooting. So very quickly, we had the COVID plan that we had was basically a stage 4 COVID plan, so we could walk straight into it. And we were given exemption because we had the sites that we could control easily, and the fact that we're already in production with a very strong COVID plan in place.
Okay. Then a question: will Australia become a country of choice for foreign companies due to our low rate of infection and our COVID controls? What do you both think of that?
Well, all I can say is I've done a lot of international production, as you know. I had so many people contact me about international productions coming to Australia that I think we're about to burst at the seams. So the answer would be clearly yes at the moment.
Yeah. Have you got the same impression, Annie?
Well, my experience right now, I'm actually crewing up for a production in Queensland, and it's very challenging because a lot of productions have now kicked off again, and so everybody's starting in pre-production in the next few weeks to be all shooting before Christmas. So just actually having the number of crew that we might need if international productions came to Australia, that might be, one of the worst problems that we might face.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. We're certainly bursting at the seams in this part of the world as well, in the Northern Rivers. We've got a last question before we sort of start to close, and that's just about responsibilities for location owners in regards to agreeing for productions to take place on their premises, and where does the responsibility lie for protocols and compliance?
Look, it's a really good question, and luckily I haven't had to answer that question based on our productions, although we're just about to, because we're trying to get With Intent back up, and we're hoping to start shooting at the beginning of October. The responsibilities lie with the people, with the producers and the production company if they're renting the place, the location. So it's kind of as simple as that. And clearly, the production needs to make sure that we can comply with our COVID risk management plan within that location, no matter where it is. So it's particularly in Melbourne at the moment, it's quite difficult. And in fact, we're thinking about moving our show, the location side of it, out to the regions outside Melbourne, because it's stage 3 instead of stage 4. But in Sydney and clearly in other states, Brisbane particularly, or Gold Coast particularly, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I'd just like to wrap up by thanking you both for sharing your extraordinary experiences through this very difficult year for our industry and many other industries. I think that, just to sum up, that it comes down to each production and every sort of unique scenario to having a risk assessment, and then working through the Screen Australia and other guidelines that are available to figure out your strategy for addressing those risks that are identified, and then just really sort of ensuring compliance. And let's hope that we don't have to keep doing this for too much longer. But meanwhile, just the hugest thank you to both of you, and congratulations for your incredible work in sort of being real leaders for our industry in continuing production through this extraordinary time. So hugest thank you to both of you, to Brett and to Annie, for sharing your time and your hard gleaned expertise.
Thanks, Lois.
Thank you very much.